I started my hike early in the morning, when the forest was still wrapped in the damp hush of night receding. Mist hung low over the trail, threading through the trunks like a living thing, clinging to moss-covered rocks and wet pine needles. The air was cold, sharper than I had expected for late spring, and every breath I drew felt thick and heavy in my lungs. I had chosen a trail that was long and rarely traveled, one that promised solitude and elevation changes enough to make a single day feel like an achievement. My pack felt heavier than usual, though I had only brought the basics: water, a small first aid kit, my camera, a light jacket, and some snacks. I kept checking my map, though the trail markers were mostly clear, painted white on tree trunks at intervals that sometimes felt too far apart. The forest seemed normal at first, almost inviting, but there was a subtle unease that I couldn't shake. The usual forest sounds, the rustling of leaves, the occasional bird call, were either absent or muted, as if the woods were holding their breath. My boots sank slightly into the damp earth, and every step I took made the soft, wet leaves underfoot shift and crackle. I tried to focus on the rhythm of walking, on the sounds of my own movement, but I felt eyes on me in a way that didn't make sense. Shadows moved differently here, longer and more deliberate than the sun should have cast. I kept reminding myself that it was just early morning, the light still struggling to reach through the thick canopy. I had been hiking for about 2 hours when I noticed a small, narrow trail branching off from the main path. It looked older, less maintained, and the brush was thicker. For some reason I couldn't explain, I felt compelled to follow it, even though my instincts told me to stay on the marked trail. The air changed as soon as I stepped onto it. The smell was different here, damp soil mixed with something metallic and faintly sour. I assumed it was the natural decay of fallen leaves and rusting vegetation, but it made my stomach twist. The ground sloped sharply, and I had to hold onto tree roots to keep from sliding. My heart began to pick up, not from exertion, but from the sense of being somewhere I wasn't meant to be. The trail narrowed further until I could barely squeeze through, branches scraping my jacket and pulling at my hair. The forest felt denser, almost suffocating. I realized that I hadn't heard another sound in a long while, not even the distant hum of a bird or the soft rustle of small animals. It was complete silence, broken only by my own breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself it was normal, that some parts of the forest just didn't have much life at this time of day. But a small voice in my head kept asking why I had gone off the main trail in the first place. After another half hour of slow, careful movement, I reached a small clearing. It was almost perfectly round, with grass that was unusually flattened in places and the surrounding trees standing unnaturally straight and close together. The light here was dim, even though the sun had risen higher. I noticed small pieces of debris scattered across the ground. Scraps of torn cloth, plastic bottles, and empty food wrappers that looked as though they had been there for a while. My unease deepened. This place felt used, but not by people who were hiking. I scanned the tree line, looking for a sign of someone, but there was nothing. No footprints, no animal tracks, nothing that explained the feeling of being watched. I decided to turn back, retracing my steps carefully, but something was wrong. The trail I had followed seemed unfamiliar. The branches didn't match where I remembered they had been, and the small dips in the earth, the rocks I had stepped over, were in slightly different positions. My heart rate spiked, and my breathing became shallow. I started to panic, realizing that the path I had thought I knew no longer seemed to exist. I considered my options. I could climb straight up the slope to try to get a view, but it was steep, slippery, and densely covered with underbrush. I could continue following the twisting trail, hoping it eventually led back to the main path, but every direction looked the same, every tree trunk identical to the next. I chose to keep moving forward. My pace quickened despite the terrain, and I kept reminding myself to stay calm, to focus on small, concrete actions. One step, then another. My eyes scanned constantly, and I began marking trees with scratches from my knife, leaving small symbols in case I needed to retrace my steps. The forest grew colder as I went, the sun barely reaching through the thick canopy. Mist began to gather again, clinging to my hair and clothes, making visibility difficult. I could feel the damp seeping through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. My water bottle felt impossibly far away, my stomach growling with a hunger that made my head feel light. My muscles ached from constantly adjusting to the uneven terrain, from climbing over roots and rocks, from slipping and regaining balance. Every sound was amplified: the snapping of a branch, the drip of water from leaves above, the scuff of my boots against moss. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never felt before. Hours passed, though I had no way of knowing for sure. The sun dipped lower, filtering weakly through the trees in angled streaks. I began to feel desperate, realizing that I might be lost for real. Panic had been gnawing at me in small bites, but now it surged in a way that made my vision narrow and my movements clumsy. I considered staying put and hoping someone would find me, but the forest here was so dense and remote that I knew I had little chance of being seen. I had to keep moving. Every instinct screamed that forward motion was the only path to safety. Eventually, just as my strength was fading and my boots soaked through, I noticed a faint line of sunlight through the trees. I climbed toward it, each step painstaking and slow, until I broke through to a ridge overlooking a familiar portion of the main trail. Relief hit me like a physical force. I could see my footprints in the mud, the trail snaking away in both directions. I descended carefully, muscles trembling and soaked with sweat and mist. By the time I reached the main path, exhaustion had drained every ounce of adrenaline from me. I paused to sit on a rock, letting the forest sounds, birds, wind, insects, wash over me in their ordinary, harmless rhythm. The unease lingered, but I knew I was no longer in that isolated clearing. I hiked back slowly, stopping every few minutes to catch my breath and reassure myself that the danger had passed. When I finally reached my car, parked at the trailhead, my legs were shaking, and my clothes clung to me with cold dampness. I didn't stop until I was on the road, headlights cutting through the forest shadows. Later, I traced my steps on the map and realized the path I had taken was barely documented, a faint line that likely had not been used in years. I understood then why the forest had seemed so unnatural, so silent, so oppressive. It wasn't haunted or cursed. It was abandoned, forgotten, and disorienting, a place where the human mind could easily lose its bearings. I left the trailhead with a new respect for the forest and a clearer understanding of how quickly solitude can turn into fear. The memory stayed with me, a quiet reminder that the wilderness is beautiful, but it is also indifferent, and losing your way in it is a very real danger. I started hiking just after sunrise, the air still cold enough to sting my lungs with every breath. Frost clung to the grass along the parking area, and the dirt under my boots felt hard and dry. I stood for a moment checking my gear, moving slowly, enjoying the quiet start. I had printed the map the night before and folded it into my jacket pocket. A loop trail, 8 miles, familiar terrain. I had done longer hikes alone and never felt uneasy about it. This one felt simple. The first stretch of trail moved gently uphill through mixed forest. Tall pines cast long shadows, and the light filtered through in thin bands that shifted as the sun climbed. I settled into a steady pace, listening to my breathing and the soft scrape of boots against dirt and stone. The smell of cold soil and pine resin hung low in the air. Every so often a bird stirred somewhere deeper in the trees. Felt normal, safe, the kind of hike where your mind drifts and your body moves without effort. About an hour in, the trail crossed a shallow stream. I stepped from rock to rock, barely breaking stride. On the far side, the path widened for a short distance before narrowing again. I checked the time without stopping. I was right on schedule. The loop would bring me back to the car by mid-afternoon. Plenty of daylight. 2 hours after I started, I reached a fork. A wooden marker was nailed to a tree at eye level. The arrow pointed left, labeled with the trail name I had been following since the start. I noticed right away that the wood looked newer than the other signs I had passed. The color was lighter, the edges sharper, the lettering cut deeper and cleaner. I remember thinking it must have been replaced recently. I did not feel suspicious. The map showed a left turn somewhere around this distance, and my legs felt good. I followed it without thinking. The trail on the left dipped slightly and grew narrower. The ground looked less packed, the leaves thicker, as if fewer boots had passed through. I slowed a bit and paid closer attention to my footing. The forest closed in, trees standing closer together, branches knitting overhead. The light thinned. I noticed then how quiet it had become. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed absent. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have, the crunch of leaves sharp and dry, echoing in a way that made me aware of my own presence. I told myself it was nothing. Some sections of forest are like that. Still, my shoulders tightened without me meaning to. I took a drink from my bottle and kept moving. After another mile, the trail narrowed until it was barely visible. The ground dipped and rose in small, uneven waves. Roots crossed the path like dark veins. I had to watch each step. That was when I noticed the footprints. Not animal, boots. Deep impressions pressed into soft earth where the ground stayed damp. They were all heading the same direction. None coming back. I stopped and crouched to look closer. The tread pattern looked heavy, wide at the heel, not like trail runners or light boots. The prints were spaced far apart, as if whoever made them walked fast or carried weight. I stood and scanned ahead, expecting to see movement or hear something, but there was nothing. The forest remained still. I pulled the map from my pocket and unfolded it. The paper crackled loudly in the quiet. I traced the line of the trail with my finger. The section I was on did not match what I saw around me. According to the map, the path should have curved back toward the ridge by now. Instead, it kept sloping downward. The trail I was on did not exist there. A thin, cold feeling crept into my chest. I looked back the way I had come. The path behind me looked the same as the one ahead. Narrow, dim, overgrown. I told myself the smartest move was to turn around while I still had daylight and energy. I turned and walked back the way I thought I had come. After 10 minutes, I still had not reached the fork. My pace quickened without me deciding to do it. I watched for landmarks, for anything I recognized. After 20 minutes, panic started creeping in, slow and steady. The trees looked the same in every direction. The ground felt unfamiliar under my feet. I passed a fallen log with pale bark and a split trunk. A few minutes later, I passed it again. The same break, the same angle, the same patch of bare earth beside it. I stopped walking and stood still, forcing myself to breathe slowly. My heart beat hard against my ribs. I checked the time. The sun was lower now, the light turning duller. I tried to orient myself using the slope of the land, but the forest blocked any clear sense of direction. I raised my head and listened. Nothing answered. I continued back, counting my steps, trying to keep my mind focused. When I finally found the fork again, my stomach dropped. The marker was gone. The tree stood there with a single nail sticking out of the bark, rust starting to creep around the metal. The lighter wood and arrow were nowhere on the ground. No broken pieces. Nothing. I stared at the nail for a long time, my mouth dry. The forest around the fork felt different now. Closer. Darker. I could feel the air cooling as the sun dropped behind the trees. I thought about the boot prints all heading one way, none returning. I forced myself to think clearly. The fork had two paths. I had come from one earlier in the day. The other had to lead back toward the main trail system. I chose the path opposite the one that had swallowed me and started walking. This trail felt more solid underfoot. The leaves were thinner, the dirt packed down. After a while, I began to see signs of use. Broken twigs, a candy wrapper half buried near a rock. My breathing slowed. My legs ached, but the familiar burn felt grounding. I kept moving, even when my calves cramped and my shoulders stiffened. The light faded fast. Shadows stretched across the trail, and the air grew damp and heavy. I walked faster, ignoring the pain in my feet. When the trail widened and curved upward, relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. A familiar signpost appeared ahead, dark with age, the lettering worn shallow by years of weather. I knew where I was. I reached my car just before dark. The parking lot was empty, the frost returning to the grass as the temperature dropped. I leaned against the door for a moment before unlocking it, my hands shaking as the tension drained away. I sat inside with the engine off, listening to my own breathing, replaying the day in my head. Later, I reported what happened to a ranger at the station near the trailhead. I did not describe it as fear at first, just confusion. He reviewed the map and the area I pointed to. According to park records, there had never been a maintained trail on the left side of that fork. The land dropped into unmanaged forest with no marked routes. He explained that someone had, in the past, nailed fake markers to trees to lead hikers off-route. The signs were usually removed when discovered, but new ones sometimes appeared. They never caught who did it. No motive was ever confirmed. The boot prints I saw made sense then. People had followed the marker. Some may have turned back. Others may have needed help. A few may have been found far from where they meant to be. I drove home in silence, my mind stuck on the image of the clean, new arrow and the empty nail left behind. I thought about how easily I followed it, how quickly confidence turned into disorientation. I had trusted the sign because it looked official and because I wanted the hike to stay easy. Since that day, I check every marker against my map. I pay attention to the quiet, and I never assume a trail exists just because someone says it does. I chose the trail because it was quiet and unpopular. That was the whole point. I wanted a long climb with no noise except my breathing and the scrape of boots on dirt. The trailhead sat off a narrow service road, marked by a faded post and a gravel turnout that only held 2 cars. Mine was the only one there. The air was cool and dry, the kind that sharpens your senses. I tightened my straps, checked my water, and stepped onto the path. The trail rose right away, a steady incline through mixed woods. The ground was hard from recent dry weather, with loose leaves pushed to the sides by the few people who came through. I settled into a rhythm. My pack shifted with each step. My breath stayed even. I felt relaxed in the way that only comes when you expect nothing to happen. Halfway up the incline, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful. They matched my pace so closely that for a moment I thought the sound was my own echo. I stopped. The sound stopped with me. The silence after felt heavier than before, as if the forest leaned in to listen. I stood there longer than I meant to, counting my breaths, staring at the ground ahead. Nothing moved. No branches snapped. No leaves fell. After a full minute, I started walking again. The footsteps returned right away, a few paces back, steady and unhurried. I told myself it was another hiker giving space. That happens on quiet trails. Some people avoid passing. I waited for the path to curve or widen so I could glance back without making it obvious. When it did, I looked. The trail behind me was empty. No figure between the trees. No shadow stretching across the ground. No sound except the steps that kept time with mine. The incline grew steeper. Sweat dampened the back of my shirt. I focused on the climb, on keeping my pace steady. The sound stayed the same distance behind me, neither closing nor falling back. Each time I slowed, it slowed. Each time I stepped carefully over roots, it matched that care. I stepped off the trail to adjust my pack and watched the path behind me. The leaves rustled where the trail bent out of sight. A boot pressed into the dirt just at the edge of the bend, heel first, firm enough to leave a clean print. Then it lifted back out, slow and controlled, as if whoever it was had decided not to step fully into view. The trail went still again. My heart started to hammer. I could feel it in my throat. I tightened the straps with shaking fingers and stepped back onto the path. I picked up speed, not running yet, just walking faster. The footsteps sped up too. They stayed calm, evenly spaced, the sound of someone who was not struggling. The trees thinned as the trail climbed higher. Light broke through in bright patches. I could see farther ahead, which should have helped. It did not. I kept expecting to see someone step out or call out, but nothing happened. The sound stayed behind me, patient. I broke into a jog. My breath turned sharp. The pack bounced against my shoulders. The footsteps stayed the same distance back, steady and controlled, like whoever it was had no trouble keeping up. That was when fear stopped being a thought and became a physical thing. My hands tingled. My mouth went dry. I scanned the ground as I ran, looking for a place where the trail widened enough to turn and see clearly. My foot slipped on loose gravel, and I stumbled but stayed upright. The steps behind me adjusted instantly, matching the stumble without gaining ground. The trail opened into a small clearing near the ridge. Low brush gave way to bare dirt and scattered rocks. The incline eased. As soon as I crossed into the open space, the footsteps stopped for good. The silence hit so hard it felt unreal. I turned around and shouted, my voice cracking, the sound tearing out of me and dying against the trees. Nothing answered. The clearing stayed empty. The trail behind me showed no movement at all. I stood there shaking, listening, waiting for any sign. My breath slowly slowed. The air felt cooler up there, moving lightly across the open ground. I could hear birds again, faint and distant, as if sound had returned to the world all at once. I did not continue the hike. I turned back the way I had come, moving fast but controlled, stopping often to listen. Nothing followed me. The trail felt normal again, just dirt and leaves and sun. Still, I did not relax until I reached the lower switchbacks where the trees grew thicker and the air felt warmer. At the trailhead, I paused before getting into my car. The sun had climbed high enough to dry the ground near the parking area, but the dirt closer to the trees still held prints clearly. My own boot marks led out onto the trail, fresh and sharp. Beside them, offset just enough to show intention, was another set following the entire way. Same size, same tread. The pattern matched mine so closely it looked like I had walked the trail twice. I crouched to look closer. The depth of the prints told the story. Mine showed the uneven pressure of climbing, toes digging in on the steep sections, heels lighter where I jogged. The other prints were even, controlled, no signs of strain. They stopped at the point where the trail entered the clearing and did not continue beyond it. There were no marks where the person stepped aside or turned around on the packed ground. The soil there was too hard to hold detail. The explanation came together slowly as the adrenaline faded. Someone had been on the trail behind me from the start of the incline. They wore boots like mine, common hiking boots sold everywhere. They chose to stay just out of sight, using the curves and trees to avoid being seen. When I stopped, they stopped. When I sped up, they matched me. They watched me step off the trail and tested how close they could get without being seen. When the trail opened into a space with no cover, they stopped following. They turned back where they could not stay hidden. There was nothing supernatural about it, just a person who wanted to remain unseen on a quiet trail chosen for that reason. Maybe they thought it was a game. Maybe they wanted to see how long they could follow someone without being noticed. Maybe they had worse intentions and decided against them when the ground opened up and visibility improved. I drove away with the image of those prints burned into my mind, the near-perfect match to my own steps. Since then, I no longer choose trails for their emptiness alone. I pay attention to sound in a different way now, not just for what I hear, but for what stops when I stop. I found the campsite by accident, a few yards off the trail, because I stepped aside to let my legs rest. The trail had been climbing for most of the morning, a long steady push through forest that felt older than the map suggested. The air was dry and cool, and the ground held the smell of pine needles and dust. I had planned to hike through without stopping, but the grade wore me down faster than I expected. I moved off the path, thinking only about shade and a place to stand without blocking anyone else. That was when I saw the fire pit. It sat in a shallow dip between trees, ringed with stones that were darkened by soot. Gray ash filled the center, not scattered or washed away, but settled, as if the last fire had burned down slowly and been left alone. The ash still held shape, small collapsed logs frozen where they had fallen. It looked recent, not warm but not old either. I stepped closer, my pack creaking softly as I shifted my weight. The ground around the pit was flattened, pine needles pressed down into the dirt in a wide oval. A crushed tent pole lay nearby, bent in the middle, the metal split where too much force had been applied. It was not snapped clean. It looked stepped on. A backpack rested against a tree a few feet away. One strap had slipped off the trunk and lay twisted on the ground. The zipper was half open. Inside, I could see folded clothing and a map corner peeking out. Everything looked arranged, not scattered. Nothing had been torn apart or dumped out in a hurry. I scanned the area expecting to see more gear. A sleeping bag, a food bag, a water filter. There was nothing else. No smell of food. No hanging line in the trees. No boots set aside. No person. I stood there listening, my breathing loud in my ears. The forest around the campsite felt muted, like the sound had been absorbed by the trees. The trail was close enough that I could still hear the faint echo of my own movement when I shifted, but no other hikers passed. No voices carried through. No birds called nearby. I waited, telling myself the person might be nearby, down by a stream or behind the trees. 10 minutes passed. The light shifted slightly as clouds moved overhead. Nothing changed. The longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. Everything was too neatly left behind. It looked like someone had stood up in the middle of a task and walked away without planning to return. I took a slow step backward and noticed the dirt near the edge of the campsite looked disturbed. Not footprints, not clearly, but something long had pressed into the soil. I followed it with my eyes. The mark widened, then narrowed, scraping through needles and loose earth. It led downhill into thick brush where the forest dropped sharply away. I felt my stomach tighten. The brush was dense enough that the mark disappeared after a few feet, swallowed by shadows and leaves. Whatever had made it had not come back up. I stood there for a long time, weighing my options. Following it felt wrong. Leaving felt wrong too. I did not know what I could do that would help without making things worse. In the end, I took mental notes. The position of the backpack, the bent pole, the direction of the drag marks. I stepped carefully back onto the trail and continued downhill, my pace faster than before, my attention fixed on every sound. Less than a mile later, I saw movement ahead. Several figures moved along the trail in a loose line, scanning the ground and trees. Their clothing stood out against the forest, bright panels and packs heavier than mine. They carried radios and poles. They noticed me right away and slowed. They approached with focused expressions, not relaxed like hikers out for the day. One of them made a gesture toward me, a question without words. I understood what they wanted before I reached them. I nodded and indicated the direction I had come from. I used my hands to describe the campsite, the gear, the location off the trail. I mimed the drag marks leading downhill. As I did, their posture changed. They looked at each other briefly, then back toward the slope. One of them made a note. Another adjusted their pack. They thanked me with a nod and a quick gesture and continued uphill, moving with purpose now, spreading out as they went. I stood there for a moment after they passed, listening to the sound of their movement fade into the trees. Then I turned and kept walking, my legs heavy, my thoughts fixed on the image of the abandoned camp. I finished the hike in a haze. The rest of the trail felt longer than it should have. Every broken branch caught my eye. Every dark patch of brush made me slow down. When I reached my car, I sat inside for a while without starting it, replaying the scene over and over. The clean backpack, the ash that had not been scattered, the drag marks that went downhill and did not return. That night, I could not stop thinking about it. I looked it up, searching local reports and park updates until I found what I was looking for. A hiker had been reported missing 4 days earlier. Same area, same trail system. The description of the gear matched what I had seen. The timeline lined up too. For days was long enough for ash to cool and settle, long enough for a camp to sit untouched, long enough for weather to soften tracks without erasing them. The next morning, an update appeared. The search party had located the campsite based on a report from another hiker. They confirmed the location and condition of the gear. They followed the disturbed ground downhill. The drag marks ended at a rock ledge overlooking a ravine. The drop was steep, lined with jagged stone and dense growth below. There was no clear path down and no sign of a climb back up. They searched the ravine floor and the surrounding slopes for days. They used ropes, dogs, and aerial sweeps. They found no body, No clothing, no pack, nothing that explained what happened after the marks reached the ledge. The official explanation focused on a fall. The hiker may have slipped, been injured, and tried to move before collapsing. The drag marks could have been the result of someone pulling themselves downhill, disoriented or hurt. The ravine was deep enough that a fall could scatter remains or conceal them under debris. Weather and wildlife could erase evidence quickly. It all made sense on paper. Still, the image that stayed with me was not the ravine. It was the campsite, the way it looked paused, not abandoned. The bent pole crushed with force instead of wear. The backpack half unzipped, like someone had planned to come back in seconds. I understood why the search team reacted the way they did when I described it. The scene suggested something had gone wrong fast. Not a slow decision, not a planned move. Something that interrupted the normal rhythm of camping. I hike less now, and when I do, I pay attention to the spaces just off the trail. The places where the forest opens enough to hide a life for a night or two. When I see a fire ring or flattened ground, I look for the small details. What is missing matters as much as what is there. That campsite stays with me because it had answers up to a point, then nothing beyond it. The marks led to a clear edge, and after that, the story ended in open air. The trail was supposed to loop back to the parking lot. 6 miles. Easy terrain. That was what the guidebook promised. The map at the trailhead showed a simple circuit, a gentle climb, and a series of switchbacks that would bring me back to my car without effort. I had been looking forward to the hike for weeks, counting the hours of solitude and quiet. I set out just after sunrise, the air sharp and crisp, and felt the familiar rhythm of boots on dirt, pack shifting with each step. The first 2 miles passed without incident. Birds called in the distance. The stream that cut across the trail murmured quietly. The forest felt normal, safe, like it always had on other hikes. After 6 miles, I was still hiking. I checked my watch and the GPS on my phone. The signal kept cutting out, flickering in and out as I tried to pinpoint my location. The map app showed me moving, but the trail line never reached the endpoint. Instead, the line extended forward endlessly, twisting and bending as if the path itself refused to end. I stopped and looked around. The sun was higher now, angled through the trees in bright shafts that made the forest floor glow in patches. I had passed this section before, I was certain of it, but everything looked slightly off. The moss on the rocks, the angle of the fallen logs, even the way the light touched the branches, familiar, yet subtly wrong. I passed the same creek 3 times. Each time, it gurgled the same way, wound the same around a twisted tree that leaned over its bank. The same boulder shaped like a chair, jagged on the sides, hollowed slightly where rainwater had collected. I had walked past both before hours ago, or so I thought. A creeping unease settled into my chest. I began to doubt myself. I retraced steps mentally, noting landmarks, counting turns. Still, the path led me forward, unyielding, looping in patterns I could not follow. I fished in my pack for the small container of chalk I sometimes carried for marking trees on longer hikes. White lines on bark. A small method to track where I had been, a visual reassurance that I could recognize my path. I marked a tree beside the creek and continued. 10 minutes later, I returned to the same spot. The chalk line was gone. The bark looked untouched, as if I had never drawn it. My stomach tightened. I tried again on the next bend, marking a knot in a tree trunk. By the time I passed it again, the line had vanished. I stared at the tree for a long moment, pressing my palm against the rough bark, trying to feel the familiar texture. It was exactly as I remembered, yet the trail repeated itself in ways that refused logic. Landmarks, paths, everything reset or folded back onto itself. I sat down on a fallen log, forcing myself to breathe slowly, counting heartbeats to regain composure. Sweat cooled on my back. The forest felt still, heavier somehow, the rustle of leaves muted. I closed my eyes for a few breaths, trying to ground myself in the familiar sensations. The rough bark under my hands, the damp smell of pine, the cool dirt beneath my feet. When I opened my eyes, I made a decision. I would stop trying to follow the trail. It had ceased to behave like a trail. I would ignore it, step off, walk in a straight line, trust only what I could see. I pushed through low brush, snapping twigs underfoot, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. Every sound was amplified. Birds took flight with startled calls. My boots scuffed dirt and stones, the rhythm steady but unfamiliar. I moved toward the incline I thought would lead back to the road, using the sun and the slope to guide me. The forest seemed indifferent, silent except for the occasional snapping branch underfoot. I kept the pace deliberate, slowing when I felt fatigue, stopping only to ensure I maintained a straight path. After less than half a mile, the trees thinned, the undergrowth lessened. I broke out onto a service road, gravel underfoot, wide enough for a vehicle. Relief hit in waves, tension draining from my shoulders. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed faintly in the distance. I followed the road downhill, aware of each step, each rock beneath my feet, until the trailhead appeared. My car waited, sunlight reflecting off the hood, ordinary and familiar. A ranger appeared nearby, standing at the edge of the lot. I approached, explaining only that I had hiked the loop. He nodded once, gestured for me to follow, and led me to a small clearing where the trail map hung. He indicated the path I had been on. According to park records, that loop had been closed years ago. People had repeatedly entered it, only to get disoriented and wander off. The closure was meant to prevent accidents. The trail had officially been abandoned, reclaimed by the forest. He did not explain how I had accessed it, or how the path had seemed maintained enough for me to walk 6 miles before realizing the problem. He did not need to. The forest itself held the answer. Somewhere in those woods, a trail persisted, a path that no longer existed on maps but behaved like it did, a hidden circuit that could trap anyone who followed it too long. I sat in the car, still breathing hard, feeling the uneven rhythm of my heart. I thought about every repeated landmark, the twisted tree, the creek, the boulder shaped like a chair, and the chalk lines that vanished. I thought about the GPS lines stretching endlessly forward, cutting out in bursts, unable to anchor me to reality. The memory of those repeated patterns burned in my mind. How the forest could appear familiar, comforting even, and yet be impossible to navigate. I had learned a new caution: to trust only what was real underfoot, not what maps, not what apps, not memory. The forest could rearrange itself without warning, folding paths back into themselves, hiding endpoints. That hike changed how I move through the woods. I carry a compass now, study topography more carefully, leave markers in permanent ways when I feel the need. I avoid trails that are marked closed, no matter how inviting they appear. The loop still exists somewhere, overgrown, hidden, repeating in ways a hiker cannot predict. I know it because I walked it, though no record confirms it, and the forest seems to remember me every time I close my eyes and trace the 6 miles that refuse to end. I reached the summit just before sunset. The air was thin and cold, sharp enough to make my lungs ache with every breath. The ridge was narrow, rock outcroppings jutting from the soil, dusted with loose gravel and patches of hardy grass that clung stubbornly to life. The wind had picked up, brushing over the peak with a biting edge. The sky was a deep orange fading to violet, the last streaks of sunlight stretching across distant valleys. There was already someone there, a man standing at the edge, facing away from me, still as a statue. He wore standard hiking clothes, lightweight jacket, pants, boots, but carried no pack. His posture was rigid, almost deliberate, shoulders squared, hands at his sides. At first, I thought he might be another hiker enjoying the view, frozen in thought. I stepped closer and said hello, casually, assuming he was immersed in the scenery. He didn't move. No shift in weight, no turn of the head. Nothing. The silence between us was sudden and heavy. My footsteps sounded unusually loud on the gravel as I approached. The sun slanted over the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched toward the base of the peak. Something about his presence made my stomach tighten. I noticed his boots then, clean as new. No dirt, no scuffs, No trace of the rough trail that had worn my own soles. That made no sense. Every hiker at this elevation, after the incline and gravel, would have dust or mud, scuffs from jagged rocks. These were pristine. I paused, uncertain whether to continue closer or step back. I said hello again, louder this time, hoping to elicit some sign that he was aware of me. Still nothing, not even a blink. When he finally turned around, everything fell into place with a sudden, stomach-churning clarity. His eyes were unfocused, glassy, staring without direction or recognition. The skin around them was pale and taut. His lips were cracked and gray, his face cold and dry. A smell hit me instantly, sour and unnatural. Faint at first but growing sharper as I stood frozen in place. Smelled wrong, dead wrong, like the lingering odor of something that had been exposed to wind and sun for hours. He took one slow step toward me, then another. I backed away, heart hammering against my chest. Every instinct screamed to run. His movements were stiff, unsteady, almost mechanical. The wind tugged at my jacket and hair, but he advanced despite it, slow but deliberate. My fingers gripped the straps of my pack, the straps cutting into my hands as I forced my legs to move backward. Gravel slipped beneath my boots, small stones skittering down the slope. The orange of the sky deepened into purple as I edged away, the rock underfoot uneven and treacherous. He continued toward me, a weightless inevitability, and every step he took seemed disconnected from reason. My breathing was ragged. Each inhale burned in my chest. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe frostbite, maybe shock, maybe a sudden collapse of awareness. None of it made the sight of him feel any less wrong. I turned and ran, heart in my throat, lungs screaming. The summit was a thin ridge, a narrow escape path lined with loose gravel. Each step required balance and caution, but fear pushed me faster than my muscles wanted to move. Behind me, I did not hear shouting, no calls for attention, just the crunch of my own boots on the rock. I did not look back. Every second that passed without his presence behind me felt unreal, like part of my mind refused to accept what I had seen. The descent was steep. My thighs burned with effort, my calves threatening to cramp. I zigzagged carefully to maintain footing, ignoring every minor obstacle, every loose stone. The forested slope below appeared as shadows and shapes in the fading light. I focused on it, on the tangible trail beneath my feet, anything to anchor myself to something real. The summit disappeared behind a ridge as I moved, and I dared not glance back. Finally, I reached the lower trail, the dirt path running through pines and loose undergrowth. The air grew warmer, the wind softer. My pace slowed only once I reached the main loop, the trail I had climbed hours earlier. I did not stop until I saw my car, parked alone in the lot, headlights reflecting faintly in the fading light. I leaned against it, chest heaving, sweat cooling rapidly on my back. I called it in immediately, describing the location and the man I had seen. The operator listened, took notes, and told me someone would check the summit. I did not wait. I could not go back. The wind shifted and the shadows stretched into the lot as I sat in the car, trying to regain a normal rhythm of breathing. The events of the past hour played over and over, every detail as vivid as it had been in real time. His eyes, glassy. His lips, gray and cracked. His boots, impossibly clean. The smell that had made my stomach turn. Later, I learned what had happened. A ranger called me after reviewing the report. They had found a body near the summit that morning, hours before I arrived. Exposure. He had been alone, hiking without proper preparation, and succumbed to the cold, the thin air, and the wind. He had been dead for at least a day before I reached the summit. That explained the stiffness, the glassy eyes, the gray lips. That explained the boots, cleaned by some unknown circumstance or overlooked in the initial scene. That explained the unnatural smell carried down the ridge in the evening air. The knowledge settled some of the fear, but it did not erase the image from my mind. Seeing him alive, though unresponsive, moving, made the reality immediate, almost tangible. The forest had hidden death in plain sight. I had encountered someone who was already gone, a body preserved in the thin, cold air at the peak, still upright, still moving in the mind's eye. I never returned to that trail alone. I changed my routine, started checking local reports for missing hikers before every trip, studied exposure and summit conditions more carefully. I carry emergency blankets now, always keep extra water and food in my pack, and monitor the weather in minute detail. The summit taught me how quickly the line between life and death can shift in the mountains, how a person can appear present when they are not, and how easy it is to mistake stillness for safety. The forest is unchanged. The trail remains steep and beautiful, quiet and inviting. But I remember that day with perfect clarity. The summit and the man, the cold wind, the orange and purple sky, and the slow, impossible step that reminded me just how fragile human life is at high altitude. I remember the relief when I reached the car, and the lingering weight of knowledge that the forest will not warn you before it takes someone. That image stays with me, clear and unwavering, as vivid now as it was in the fading light of the mountains.